South Korea ex-President Yoon appeals insurrection verdict. A timeline of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. 4 dead in Iranian military helicopter crash. US tariffs come into effect at 10% lower than threatened. Unprecedented military raid is risky gamble for Mexico's Sheinbaum. South Korea's former president Yoon Suk-yeol has filed an appeal against his conviction for insurrection, according to his legal team. Last week, the Seoul Central District Court found Yoon guilty of leading an insurrection linked to his declaration of martial law in 2024. The court sentenced him to life in prison. At the time, Yoon said the verdict was difficult to accept, but did not immediately confirm whether he would appeal. On Tuesday, his lawyers announced they would formally challenge the ruling. In a statement, Yoon's legal team said they believe the verdict contains serious legal flaws and should be reviewed not only by the courts, but by history itself. They criticized what they described as an excessive prosecution and called the judgment contradictory and politically influenced. The presiding judge said Yoon ordered troops to the National Assembly in an attempt to silence political opponents who had blocked his agenda. The court ruled that the move was intended to paralyze Parliament for an extended period. At the time of the martial law declaration, Yoon was highly unpopular and faced a hostile legislature. His party held a minority in Parliament, which had blocked key budget proposals and impeached senior officials in his administration. The war began before dawn on February 24, 2022, when Russian forces crossed into Ukraine from the north, east, and south. It marked the largest land invasion in Europe since the end of World War II. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced what he called a, quote, special military operation, saying its aim was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. He insisted at the time that Russia had no intention of occupying the country. An Iranian army helicopter has crashed into a fruit market in the central province of Isfahan, killing 4 people, according to state media. The crash happened on Tuesday in the city of Dorcha. Officials said the pilot, co-pilot, and 2 market vendors were killed when the helicopter came down and caught fire. Emergency services later extinguished the blaze. A cause for the crash has not yet been announced. Iran has a long history of aviation accidents, which experts often link to aging aircraft and difficulties obtaining spare parts. Many of the country's military aircraft were purchased before the 1979 Islamic Revolution and remain in service despite maintenance challenges. The incident follows another fatal crash last week, when a US-built F-4 fighter jet belonging to Iran's regular air force went down during a training flight in the western province of Hamadan, killing 1 pilot. The United States has imposed an additional 10% tariff on most imported goods, according to a notice issued by US Customs and Border Protection. The new tariff took effect on Tuesday and applies to all imports not covered by existing exemptions. The rate matches the level first announced by President Donald Trump on Friday, despite his later statement that the tariff would be raised to 15%. The move follows a Supreme Court ruling that struck down Trump's earlier tariffs, which had been justified under emergency powers. In response, Trump announced a temporary global tariff of 10%, later saying it would be increased to 15%. In its notice, Customs and Border Protection said the guidance was issued under a February 20 presidential proclamation, and confirmed that most imports would face an additional 10% duty. No explanation was given for why the higher rate was not implemented immediately. The decision has added to confusion over US trade policy. The Financial Times quoted a White House official as saying the increase to 15% would come at a later date, though this could not be independently confirmed. Collection of the new tariffs began at midnight. At the same time, the government halted the collection of tariffs that A Mexican military raid that killed the country's most wanted cartel leader has marked the biggest security gamble so far for President Claudia Sheinbaum, intensifying her crackdown on powerful criminal groups. The Mexican army carried out a surprise operation on Sunday targeting Nemesio Oseguera, also known as El Mencho, the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG. The group has grown into Mexico's largest and most violent cartel, surpassing even the Sinaloa cartel in territorial reach. El Mencho had a $15 million bounty placed on him by U.S. authorities and had evaded capture across several Mexican and U.S. administrations, earning a reputation as untouchable. His death represents the most significant security operation in Mexico in at least a decade and could mark a turning point in the country's long-running war against organized crime. The United States provided intelligence support for the raid and has been urging Sheinbaum to take tougher action against the cartels. U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly threatened unilateral military action if Mexico failed to act. For Sheinbaum, the operation sends a signal to Washington that Mexico can conduct high-level operations against major criminal figures without U.S. troops on the ground. However, analysts warn it also carries risks at home, including the possibility of retaliatory violence.